just a quick bio for Niels. He is at the Biodiversity Research and Animal Ecology, University of Potsdam, and he is this. The list is too long. So in terms of researchers, what I do know is he has approximately 734 peer-reviewed published articles, approximately, and he's very qualified to speak with us. Sorry, Niels, that's the quick bio. You may please proceed.
Thanks a lot for this nice introduction. I must admit, it's probably around 70, not 700 publications. But thanks for believing that my research output is so high. So let me share my screen. No, actually, it is not working my side. Not at all, actually. Let me try this. Just a second again. Window, this one. All right. I have it here now. All right, wonderful. So thanks again for inviting Katja and myself to this wonderful Rangeland Biomass Research Symposium. We are very honored that we are part of this symposium. I would like to draw your focus on the impacts of bush encroachment on animal diversity and feedbacks that animal diversity can have to soil infiltration and soil moisture. Basically, all the results that I'm going to present have been gathered in an earlier project called Optimus, where we work together with many colleagues from NAST and UNAM on feedbacks actually between the biosphere and the geosphere. So any living organisms and the soil. Let me quickly have the laser pointer back again. All right. Bush encroachment is a global phenomenon. I'm not diving into details because you probably talked about it earlier. It's a slow process. So observing such fence lines, this is a picture from South Africa, is nothing that you observe from one season to another. It's something that emerges after 10 years, sometimes even later. And it's a slow process. It is a major form of land degradation. As Ivo said, it's a symptom of degradation, but it's not the cause of degradation. It reduces rangeland productivity, so there are economic costs related with it, but also ecological consequences. It changes plant communities, it changes biodiversity in these areas, and also ecosystem functioning. There are many ideas for debushing degraded or bush encroached areas for rangeland restoration, using big machines, mechanical removal, chemical weapons, let me put it like this. Fire can be used as a prevention measure. But I'm not focusing on these debushing options, but I want you to keep this in mind when looking at our results. The research questions that we were aiming at were first to set a baseline. What are the impacts actually of bush encroachment on animal diversity of different taxonomic groups, starting from insects, many different arthropods, small mammals, medium-sized mammals, carnivores, and reptiles. And second, we were interested whether and what are the feedbacks between bush encroachment, animal diversity, and the geosphere, so soil water infiltration and soil moisture, which may be of interest to you today. The study areas were in Namibia, but also in South Africa, along a rainfall gradient here from north to south. We did samples at Waterberg with 400 millimeters, approximately mean annual rainfall in the Omaheke region and in the Kalahari region in South Africa. I showed you this figure in Katja's slide already. We used shrub cover as a proxy for land use intensity because we found this pretty strong relationship. I know that this relationship only holds if the soil conditions are similar, if the topography is similar, and if these applied stocking numbers have been there for a longer period. To identify this was quite a difficult task when we started the project and established from these a bush cover gradient. So this is basically, we call it space for time substitution. We expect that if you start off here at a low proportion of shrub cover and would have a lot of livestock on it for many, many years, the area would turn into something bush encroached. You can also observe it from the sky. These are satellite images from the southern Kalahari. These are the parallel running dune crests, and in between the dune streets. What you see here, basically these darker parts is rygosum or driduring as a key encroacher in that area. And on the dune slopes here, these darker spots, this is Acacia mellifera. And it's easy to observe that this area here is basically covered with rygosum and Acacia mellifera. It's called Senegalia mellifera now, but I keep Acacia. I think I can't remember the new name. Oh, I don't want to. All right, we did these samples on the same sites repeatedly in 2001, 2005, 2009, and 2011. And you can see that this relationship remains, but the responses here are quite strong in the areas with high stocking rates, right? All right, at each of these sites, we did quite a lot of sampling. We did many vegetation surveys. We recorded diversity pattern of various animal groups, arthropods, reptiles, rodents, carnivores. And this is already the key result showing the impacts of bush encroachment on animal diversity. What you always see here on the x-axis is our shrub cover gradient, and on the y-axis, the responses of species richness of different taxonomic groups. We see here for reptiles and rodents a negative linear relationship. So with increasing shrub cover, the species diversity decreases, while for small and medium-sized carnivores and all arthropods that were captured in pitfall traps, these hump-shaped pattern. So in a way, we observe highest species richness at low to medium shrub cover values in the landscape. Okay, so overall, species richness in shrub-dominated habitat is low across all animal groups, but they are highest at low to intermediate shrub cover values. So shrubs are not bad. They are important parts of a healthy savanna rangeland ecosystem. They support biodiversity. And this has implications for debushing. This is why I had this other slide there earlier. One needs to keep this in mind when one plans large-scale debushing activities, be it for charcoal production or whatever purposes. Okay, you may ask, but why do biodiversity changes matter for rangeland management? From my perspective, because of the little things that biodiversity can do for rangelands. And if I'm mostly in Namibia during the vegetation period, and I love being there. I'm camping in the field, and I have these lights there. And after rainfall, you observe any sort of beetles, mass occurrences of them, and any sort of rojas that contribute to protein content in my meals. From a scientific perspective, we collect them in the pitfall traps, and you see many different dung beetles. There are orthopterans in there, and scorpions and whatsoever. And we also observe a lot of termite activities. Okay, right. Just a recap. In these Kalahari rangelands published in 2009, we found this hump-shaped pattern of arthropods, many different insect species. We repeated this sort of study in Namibia, in Omaheke rangelands, and found basically the same pattern. This study was done by Robert Herring. He was a master's student. He's now almost finalizing his PhD. He focused on beetle diversity only, but the same hump-shaped pattern. But he's a smart guy. He said, okay, I'm interested in these feedbacks between biology and geology. And he measured soil moisture. And we were both, and all the team was quite surprised that we found actually the same pattern for soil moisture as we found for beetle diversity. Then we thought, okay, this may indicate a feedback between shrub encroachment, beetle diversity, and soil moisture. And we're wondering, why is this the case? One important function that many insect species are doing, they create macropores in the soil. Macropores, or biological macropores, are basically holes in the soil. They can be quite deep, up to 80 centimeters deep. They have different circumferences, but we suspected these macropores to help explain the pattern that we observed. So what we did was we did a field experiment and we're asking, do macropores affect infiltration of rainwater into the soil? Many students of Namibia and Germany worked on this topic, and I show you just some examples. Arnim, he was a PhD student working actually in South Africa for many years with Klaus Kellner. He constructed a rainfall simulator. These are these square, nice little things to simulate rainfall, simply because we could not rely on rainfall, and we wanted to be sure that we can have some rain. And it's a small area. We are aware of this restriction of 50 by 50 centimeter. It had 14 by 14 injection canalula. And we had a tube pump to simulate rainfall intensity. What Arnim and his co-workers did, he did paired experiments at sites where there were macropores, and they compared these sites with sites without macropores. He applied a high rainfall intensity, and we used a blue tracer. It is basically a color that you use for food production, so it's nothing harmful at all. So you could have eaten it if you wish. So in many chewing gums, if it makes you your tongue or your lips green, blue, or whatsoever, this is basically that product. And we used it to visualize infiltration. Then we digged soil profiles to check actually the infiltration of the colored water. And this is the first result showing the impact of macropores on soil water infiltration. What you can see here is a soil profile. This is the top of the soil. This goes down 40 centimeter. And this bluish pattern here indicates how deep the water that we irrigated or imitated with our rainfall simulators infiltrated into the soil. It's a sandy soil here in this case, and there were no macropores on topsoil. This is the same situation. The distance actually between these two rainfall simulation was not more than 5 meters. And so basically the soil conditions were identical, and you can easily see that this infiltration depth was much deeper at the site with macropores compared to the site without macropores. Okay. In the next step, we were interested, okay, we observed this as in a sandy soil. We didn't even expect that macropores really have a huge effect because sandy soils are characterized by a lot of space between the single particles. So usually infiltration is quite good. Then we were looking at different soil textures and to look at the impacts of the macropores. This is just one example which has been recorded at Okumumbonde. It is a MWF farm close to water or at the bottom of the Waterberg. And on the left you see loamy sand, and on the right you see sandy soils. And as expected, we observed lower infiltration in the loamy sand compared to the sandy soils in situations where there were no macropores. Now, if we look at the impacts of the macropores, it is very pronounced that macropores improve infiltration in both situations on both soil types, but it was way more pronounced in the loamy sand. You also see a high variance actually of the data because the soil structure in loamy sand is much more variable than in sandy soils. All right. Then we were interested how much does actually the rangeland management, so the trampling and the grazing, affect soil water infiltration. And for this, we used so-called disk permeameters, which can measure steady state infiltration. You have a water column here in this permeameter, and you can include or exclude macropores. And this is what we did in the first step. We excluded the macropores, and we just want to understand how is the infiltration without macropores in a grazed and ungrazed situation under two different situations. We observed it for soil under larger shrubs and compared it to neighboring open soil where there was no vegetation involved. What you see here from this figure, that in these grazed situations, grazing and trampling reduced water infiltration into the soil significantly. And whether it was under a bush or open soil did not make a difference at all. In a second step, we allowed infiltration, including the macropores. And here you could see several patterns actually. The first one was that including macropores increases infiltration significantly. You must look at the scale here. Both show steady state infiltration millimeter per hour. But here it went up to 45 millimeter per hour. And here our maximum without macropores was only at about 5.5 millimeter. So these macropores really made the difference in the infiltration process. A second observation is that shrubs with macropores have a higher infiltration than in open soil. The darker bars are always higher than these white bars, indicating the infiltration in open soil. And this is really important from a management perspective, because if you look also at the difference between the bushes and the open soil, between grazed and ungrazed, you see that the difference here is much higher compared to the ungrazed sites, which leads to the conclusion that shrubs partly compensate actually the negative effects of grazing. Not fully, but they can contribute to it. So, but why is infiltration actually higher under shrubs? This is the last chapter of Arnim's PhD thesis, and for this, he was counting and measuring macropores at different vegetation types and vegetation structures, and I also show just one figure here, showing the number of macropores under bushes or shrubs, under perennial grass tussocks, and on open soil, and we see a positive effect of single shrubs on macropore abundance. To sum this up, species richness of insects, but also other animal taxa is highest in rangelands with low to intermediate shrub cover. Insect engineered macropores are important for soil water infiltration and soil moisture. We observe the deeper infiltration and amount in soils with macropores compared to the same soil type without macropores. They are particularly relevant in loamy soils compared to sandy soils and under grazing and trampling impacts. We observed that macropore density was highest under shrubs. So shrubs are really key to keep insects that build these macropores in rangelands. So again, shrubs per se are not bad, although they are a sign of rangeland degradation. So keep some shrubs in rangelands when you consider debushing. I really emphasize on keeping them. There will be a high benefit for soil health and conservation. Soil health, if we think of, or if we extend it, because water that is infiltrating into the soil also transports the nutrients into the soil, in addition to beetle activities and termite activities that directly transport the dung into the soil. But dilution of these nutrients and spreading via infiltration is really, really important as well. All right, I think this was it from my side. Thank you very much again for inviting me. And thanks to a huge number of people that allowed us to work on their properties. The Ministry of Environment and Tourism, now Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Namibia, MAWF, Northern Cape Nature Conservation, and all contributing co-workers and funding agencies. All right, thanks a lot. I stop it here.
Niels, I'm a little bit speechless. I don't know for how many others here, but it's fascinating the type of research that is happening around us in our own country, even if the people aren't necessarily staying here. I mean, going around counting the macropores, correlating it with the infiltration of the water. I mean, this is what farmers somehow know, feel in their guts maybe, but this is the real research, the real data. And I find it fascinating how we keep getting back to this original point. Too much.
I just wanted to add that
bad. How do we do this large scale? And how do we afford it? How do we pay for it? And then this is where all these questions are contributing to us, like, like developing as a country, we're developing this in an organic way, our solutions and our methods. Niels, thank you. Questions for Niels?
Can I add one sentence? Because I don't want to be some sort of colonizing researcher that comes to Namibia. I'm so thankful that we could establish for many years these close relationships with scientists in Namibia, without them, none of this research would have been possible. So it's really, it's a very thorough collaboration. And there's many friendships. I just realized that Dave Joubert, for example, on that last picture I showed, also unfortunately passed away some years ago. Yeah, I stop here now. I'm ready for your questions.
Yeah, I have two probably unrelated questions, one more technical and one more economical. The technical is about biodiversity screening. You are more in the discussions than I am. What future opportunities do you see for environmental DNA in biodiversity screening as contrasted by the traditional trap screen biodiversity monitoring? Also, that would also on long range offers the opportunity to do this both biodiversity and soil organic carbon from the same soil sample. That's a technical question. And the more economical question you mentioned in your former talk, that this Etosha Heights was formerly a hunting farm, and I know of at least one hunting farm which is essentially not a hunting farm anymore because there's nothing to hunt anymore. So what opportunity do you say to combine wild animal ranging to combine with the traditional safari tourism? That would imply a more detailed management of the wild animals. Yeah, so this farmer I know is desperately establishing new water holes which all dry up, etc., etc.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. Regarding the first one, I think meta DNA barcoding is probably the way one would approach it nowadays. These are earlier studies. We did not have these opportunities yet. I still believe that single samples of real specimen and the relevance of having taxonomists that know what it is, in addition to methods that allow a high sampling output. I think this is still important and relevant. Where I see one important direction in the future are detecting and artificial intelligence systems. I even see there a financial market. So having very low-tech, cheap cameras that observe the environment on site, combined with an algorithm that is able to identify the different species. There are many approaches recently popping up everywhere on the world, and I see that, and I'm convinced that this will be the next generation of biodiversity monitoring. Regarding your second question, this is way more tricky to answer. I'm not at all an economist, so I talk to many land users in these directions, but I have not the background to say, okay, if you have that and that many animals, and I have not even an idea how much an animal cost. Well, I do know how much they cost, but how this is managed. I must say that this would be difficult for me to give you a valued answer. From the economists I was working together with, they always convincingly showed solutions how cattle ranching, cattle farming, but also wildlife farming could work and make it sustainable ecologically, but also economically. I think one of the really big challenges is that particularly degraded farms or heavily affected farms are used for wildlife management. So the preconditions for a good management and for a solid economic output is difficult. This is maybe also why Etosha Heights is a good example for wildlife management, for a profitable one. I also know that the situation in the conservancies was very challenging, particularly under the COVID restrictions, because simply there was no income from tourism anymore. And we were discussing this also very often with many colleagues, whether one really needs to diversify the income generation independent from tourism. But this is a very huge and big topic that I will not stress too much now.
Yes, it's me again. Thank you for this last presentation. For me, it was a kind of an eye-opener. We know from worldwide studies that changes in vegetation type has an impact on the recharge to groundwater. Now, we don't talk about groundwater here, but ultimately having optimal infiltration rates in the root zone will lead to percolation of more infiltrated water reaching our groundwater. And here in Namibia, where we probably have 80% of the population depending on groundwater, I think that's one of the advantages of managing our rangelands properly. And here we've now got a first step how we could take care of our surface to achieve optimal recharge to the groundwater. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Indeed, we did not measure groundwater recharge. It is also not possible to relate our rainfall simulation experiments to groundwater recharge. But it is also evident that a changed infiltration, as you said, will help in recharging groundwater as well. So also in this direction, I think this is good news, actually, to make sure that you have a lively environment, that you have healthy soils, and that you aim at restoring healthy soils also in this regard.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't have a question, I just have a comment, and maybe it's going to lead us to bigger heights. In Namibia, the rural population is mostly earning the income through livestock farming. Would it not make sense that we build up on your findings and we target the livestock sector, and we see how can these research results be incorporated and give the majority of the farmers a guideline of what are the pointers, what to do to keep the bush under control or get the equilibrium right, the balance between bush and making a living from animals, which then give back whatever the ecosystem needs. I think that's the cheapest option, the most economical viable option, compared to building factories to make chemicals that we believe are restoring something, but we only focus on one specific chemical or and not the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be wonderful if some of these scientific results are taken up into these discussions, into these developments. I was in contact with many farmers, and if I present these results, I always try to convince them. Any farmer that was aiming at chopping bush or removing at large scale, I always say, no, you must leave some of these bushes in your site because it is important for the land, even also at large scale. And from my experiences, farmers do apply it. And although it is sometimes a bit challenging driving around and leaving some patches there, it is feasible. And I think this is exactly what, Evert, you are doing now, right? And testing systematically.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think this is really a brilliant way forward to pick ideas. And it's not only me that observes that shrubs are important. I just presented our own stuff. There are several scientists that believe that single shrubs are really important for ecosystem health and are valuable for rangeland management with cattle and beef production sector. And I would never blame actually beef production as a wrong or not up-to-date option for managing and using the land. I still believe this is a very important opportunity for land use, and I do not see too many alternative opportunities in areas that have low rainfall. I find this almost the most sustainable way, unless if you think about CO2 production of the beef, they probably have not the best carbon footprint. But yeah, in total, in the way it is done in Namibia, I don't see a problem at all, actually, personally. So
Niels, thank you very much.